Yeah. Today, I'm going to talk about economic bandwagon and political symbolism. So, this is also just an idea for another paper, but not yet gathered with data and like analysis, since it is a very recent event, like given the trade wars between US and China and Japan and Korea. So, this is more of presenting what is really happening between Japan and South Korea, what lies behind the trade wars, because we are comparing it with US and China and see that it is somewhat different politically and culturally. Okay, so the rationale of the study, the researcher aims to review and analyze the current economic situation of Japan, South Korea mini trade war, or as they call it, it is an economic war. It is, they do not really classify it as a trade war yet. But we want to assess if it is a smart political move or it is a good foreign policy that they keep the tension between the two countries. Because as we know, the smaller or the peripheral economies, like Philippines, would always look to the bigger countries because we only follow trends in economies, since we do not really make the biggest impact out there. So since we see that China and US really are not getting along quite well recently, this gives a bigger tension. It's like a ripple effect, and we are looking if Japan and South Korea should keep the tension going. So why is this a concern? Because everyday Filipinos, everyday Koreans, like normal citizens, would not usually feel what happens in the larger economic spectrum. But that is not always the case, especially if it is a trade war. So, say, let's look at the example of US and China. US, basically Trump, is claiming that he doesn't like the idea of trade deficits. Trade deficit happens when there are more imports than exports. So we know that US really doesn't produce much of its own products. It is an importing country. And for many presidents already in US, they do not like the idea and have always resorted to protectionist policies. However, those presidents, even Obama, still resorted back to being more of a laissez-faire person because it is the name of the game. Everyone is doing liberal trade, so why not do it as well? And it is only Trump recently who says that I will stand my ground and I will fight China with whatever it costs. And recently it seems as if there's been a lot of costs already, though it is hurting China by very little bit. But there is more of an more than the economic side of it. There's a bigger political rhetoric. So the concept and the idea for the study came about in line with the recent economic turning points. There's a shift in foreign policy and the trend of reverting back to protectionist policies. So in the 20th century, the introduction of it, people have started to think that given globalization, it is always good to trade freely with other countries, like let the invisible hand do its job. But more controlling countries and regimes have started to say that we are going to take hold of our economies, like China, and they are challenging the idea of free trade. So there are three concepts that are intertwined in this trade war. There is the rules of war, there's the concept of accumulation, and the targeted sanctions theory. So, rules of war. First of all, we ask, why do these countries engage in trade wars? Because before, when we say wars, mostly it's like World War I, World War II, and then the Cold War. And then people realize that it's not really good economically and politically because it disrupts regimes. It leaves people homeless, their families are shattered, and this is why through the Geneva Convention and many other UN conventions, they came up with the rules of war. So the rules of war states that we cannot go back to the more barbaric times that we had before. Whenever there is war going on, we cannot target women, we cannot target civilians, children. So, of course, these countries, still being the major powers that they are, would still prefer to exert their force and power because that's how you do it, that's how you keep your power, is to keep exerting it. And what better way to do that since you cannot like just release a nuclear bomb because it is, we've seen what that did to Japan. So another way of doing it now is through probably economic wars because that's how you can deal with your problems with another country without literally hurting them. And then there's the idea of accumulation. The concept of accumulation is more intertwined with the concept of new wars in recent reports, where they say that accumulation before, when we say accumulation, in the more English sense, it is acquiring land, it is acquiring gold, it is acquiring money. So wealth is money. But now, in the more recent decades, accumulation is a concept that is presented as focusing the power on the elites, where they do not really care if they gain so much money immediately. What they care about is there's a constant inflow. Because if you have a constant inflow, you have constant grip on power. So that is a more modern take at what accumulation is. Accumulation is not only economic, it is also political. So if we are going to apply it on the case of South Korea, it is more seen in the idea of chaebols. So they will always take a grip on whatever shares they have in the economy because it gives them the voice. Next, we have the targeted sanctions theory. This is a very recent theory that was actually introduced to me by another colleague in political science, who is now in law school. She was working on the thesis on targeted sanctions theory, where they said that there's also a politics within trade wars, where, of course, because we know that trade wars are more prone to happen, there are still international organizations or international governing bodies like World Trade Organization and before GATT to try and calm all of these countries down. So they can give us, say, for example, China and US, you can only give tariffs at like 500 billion. That's still big, but that's your limit. And then if you go past that, they're going to say, okay, I'm going to give you economic sanctions. Like these countries, you cannot get resources from these countries. So you have to follow the rules. But of course, China doesn't follow the rules. And they say in the targeted sanctions theory is it is more problematic if power is concentrated on the elites, because if there's a problem in the economy and if we use the targeted sanctions theory, it is more likely to hit them. So it does not disperse to the normal citizens. It does not affect you as much because we're talking about stocks. We're talking about, we're not talking about commodities really. So they're not resources, they're not steel, they're not dairy products, so they are like hard money, investments. So these are three concepts that we have to keep in check when we talk about new wars, trade wars. Well, it's like kind of the definition. They say trade wars is that states are primarily concerned with economic objectives directly related to the traded goods sector of the economy. So they're using means such as restriction of flow of goods and services, according to Connie Beer. In the recent events, we can see this in the South Korea and Japan trade disputes, where they stopped exports of several. They stopped exports of several chemicals. According to Japan, they said there was a tighter control over fluorinated polyamides, photoresists, and hydrogen fluoride. And they said they got mad at South Korea because South Korea was not as professional in handling these chemicals as they should have, as they promised. And some of these were leaking to North Korea, who were using it to make say, more destructive weapons. And while Japan was accusing South Korea of this, South Korea firmly denied that that was the case. And they came to World Trade Organization and to UN saying that you can investigate on the case, and if it is true, then we can forward with the discussion on this, because we are standing firm that we did not do anything as such. But then South Korea took it quite a little bit further than the economic dispute. They harked back to the time when they were annexed or occupied by Japan, saying that still this is another resonating dispute, and they have not formally said sorry for all of the costs that they did over the past world wars. And Japan, of course, was, this is a very heavy topic, Japan was, again, feeling as if this was a very repetitive argument. So they removed South Korea from the white list. White list is a list of countries where Japan keeps a good trade relation with these countries. So basically it's easier. For other countries, if you're not in the white list, say you have to submit or fill out 10 forms so that you can get, I don't know, our coconuts to Japan. But then if you're South Korea and you're offering them chips, they say, okay, you just fill out this one form and then you can get it in. So that is what a white list, being a part of the white list, does. And Japan said, we are striking you from the white list. And South Korea did the same. So they stopped sending microchips to each other, and as we know, this could take a toll in the near future because they are both manufacturing countries. This affects production of Samsung, of what is HK, and this also further affects other countries because it is not only South Korea's production but also the world economy, because we depend on them for making laptops, making televisions, and sometimes cars as well for Japan. So they have to come up with a trade agreement, if not. The pros of a trade war, they say, it protects domestic companies from unfair competition, it increases demand for domestic goods, it promotes local job growth, it improves trade deficits, and it punishes the nation with unethical trade policies. So how does this happen? When there are trade wars or when they resort back to protectionist policies, a country closes its curtains, its economic curtains, and says that I can produce my own goods and I can supply to whatever demanded services that my own people need. So if I am Japan, I'd say I don't need South Korea anymore. I don't need China anymore. So they increase the demand for domestic goods because the people, they don't have choice anymore. They cannot buy chips from another country. They'd have to buy whatever chips they have in their own country, even if it's not as good. And then it promotes local job growth because there are less people from, there are less outsiders coming to their country who are making the job search competitive. So we'd say that instead of, say, a group of 5, this table, if less people were to sit on this table and there were only enough number of plates, then they don't have to fight over plates. Instead, if there are like more like 5 people who came into the table, as easy as that. And then it improves trade deficits because there'd be no more trade, obviously. And then the cons of it increases the costs and induces inflation. It causes marketplace shortages, and it reduces choice, as I mentioned earlier. And it discourages trade and slows the economic growth. So that is one hazard of it. Is if you are not a good producing country, if you don't have enough resources, say you are Singapore or Hong Kong and you have very little land, very little resources, and you try to start being a more protectionist country, I don't know where that will get you. So where are these wars headed? The only positive things that we can look into so that these wars will end is we look at World Trade Organization or other international governing bodies to try and calm these countries down, even if Trump really is not that type of person to follow someone. And China also is kind of another hard country to deal with, but we are still starting with South Korea and Japan, so maybe there's something more that we can do. And there could be strong shifts in public support. So as we saw in the case of South Korea, people started going onto the streets, being against Japanese products. So they were boycotting Uniqlo. So I don't know if you did the same. But yeah, and then others say, we're not going to fly to Japan anymore, even if we have the tickets. Things like that. But this is more of a strong shift in public support. If the economy is hurt enough, say as in the case of US and Trump, if the economy is hurt enough and the people are already feeling the toll of the trade war, they may start thinking, okay, maybe our leader is not really a good economist. Maybe he was wrong, maybe we should back down. So that leaves you in a low economic and political position. Political and economic leverage. Well, rhetoric is strengthened. Why is rhetoric again put into the equation? Because different from US and China, who are just trying to recover their economic gains, Japan and South Korea would always go back to the disputes they had in the world wars. So this wound is kind of deeper than something just economic. It is more of cultural, it is more of historical. And if they're trying to further their political and economic leverages through this, then they might probably get somewhere. But as we've seen, unless one of them is willing to, say, apologize or bow down or just accept, then it is going to be a longer war ahead. Economic integration and trade agreements. This is also another resolve that we are looking forward to, but it's not really easy in Asia as it was in Europe. For economic integration, they were always saying that China, Japan, and South Korea should integrate and be like one big super economic power in East Asia. But as we know, that's not really the case because China is kind of busy with US. China sometimes doesn't like Japan. South Korea also doesn't like Japan to a very large extent, and Japan is not willing to be liked most of the time, so it's just fine with the way it is. But it has a very big potential if they could resolve a lot of their issues. And trade agreements, we recently, as we're looking at the new Southern policy, so South Korea is trying to gain more support from the South, from India and from ASEAN, because there's a lot of problem economically and politically going on in the North and East Asia. So those are the trajectories that these wars are headed. It is a very recent phenomenon, so not much data could be gathered on it, probably, maybe for US and China, but for South Korea and Japan, it's more of a political and economic theoretical analysis that we could do. So, economic bandwagon, why is it titled economic bandwagon? Because there are also some analysts who would say that other countries, though we are not hoping, other countries might go and do the same because they always look at the larger economies and try to do the same because they really don't have a trajectory of their own. They just follow whatever happens. But this is problematic because, as you can see, US has two allies in this equation, and they are at dispute with each other. So if US steps in, which is unlikely because Trump really doesn't care, then it's also problematic because it could split up the big faction. And if anyone ever tries to do bandwagoning, are other countries forced to do the same? Will the Philippines be with South Korea or with Japan? So it's kind of a big political jumble, which we are not looking forward to. but it is a big possibility, economically and politically. That's it.